In this video, I'm going to talk about the first part of setting up Git and our studio. We're going to start here at this bullet point here. I'm going to talk about registering a GitHub account, installing Git, introducing yourself to Git, and installing a Git client. Then in the second video, I'm going to be talking about setting up keys for SSH. Before I begin, I wanted to point you to this useful resource in the book Happy Git with R. There's a section called troubleshooting about specifically this type of actions that we're about to do. So if you're stuck, come here to this section and see if troubleshooting helps you get unstuck. So the very first thing you need to do is to register a GitHub account. It's not anything super complicated. As you would expect, you go to a website and then you sign up for an account. If you don't have one already, sign up. There you're going to be asked to give your email, and the important thing here is to remember which email you gave here, because you're going to need that email in a moment to set up your Git environment locally so that it connects to GitHub fluently. So I'm going to close that. I already have a GitHub account, so I don't need it. But if you do not have one, please go ahead and create one. But there is one useful advice I think that could be good to be aware of. Jenny has a ton of great advice. The single one that I make an emphasis on is the idea of using a username that is not specific to your job. For example, if you work at 2 Degrees and you have just started, I do not recommend to have the word 2 Degrees in your username, because you may change jobs later and you want your username to be flexible, right? It's gonna be your open source portfolio, so that username you're gonna port with you to another job, and you want your contributions to previous repositories, GitHub repositories, to be kind of carried and to just that public portfolio to grow with time throughout different jobs. Also, while you work at one organization, you may do open source contributions, that have nothing to do with your job. In your spare time, you may do contributions using your GitHub username just to collaborate with other people in fun projects, right? So that's the only advice that I would like to emphasize, because it's a common one to get wrong. So with that, I think I'll leave it at that. Let's go back to the document. After that, we need to talk about installing Git. Again, that points us to the book Happy Git with R. It is likely, if you already have Git, then maybe you don't need it, or you want to still follow the instructions to get a more up-to-date version. If you want to know if you have Git or not, Jenny Bryan here recommends using this command from a terminal. What is a terminal? Well, if you don't know what that is, maybe an easy way to access a terminal is from the terminal tab in our studio, and there is where you type those commands, not in the R console, but in the terminal. So you type which Git to see if you have Git somewhere, and if you do, you will see a path here that points to the place where Git is installed in your computer. You don't need to do anything in particular with that. Just notice if you get a path or nothing. If you get nothing, empty output, then that means that you don't have Git installed, and you have to follow the instructions here. So how to install Git depends on your system. You may have Windows, you click there. If you have Mac, or if you have Linux. So I'm not gonna get into that, because here I have Linux, which is a system that most likely you do not have, and these are my instructions for me. It would be copy paste that code and that code in a terminal. No, sorry, the second code, no, just this one code will install Git in my system, but in yours it's going to be a little different. So just be careful and try to follow the recommendations as closely as possible to the instructions given here. Okay, that's all about installing Git. Then you need to introduce yourself to Git. So if you have a fresh environment, your terminal could be So let's start again. So if you have a fresh environment, you can use your terminal always, well, with a fresh environment and without a fresh environment. You can use your terminal to see what options have been configured in Git. And there's two options that are obligatory for you to do anything useful in Git, which are your username and your user email. The email is the one that you used when you created your GitHub account. That's the one you want to use. So in my case, it would be something like maurodepore@gmail.com. And the way you pass that configuration to Git is using the following command: git, which is always what you need to type when you're using Git. Then let's make sure that we get this right. Introduce yourself to Git. Git and the subcommand config, and then that configuration, we want to make it at the level of the entire user, so a global setting. It can also be set at the level of a project, but you don't want that. You want it to affect your entire user. And then the commands that we are already typing. So git config -- global, and then user email with set your email, right? So if you press enter, you will set it, and once you set it, then you can use the same command but without the value of that variable, and then you would get the output that tells you, okay, it has been set. Similarly, so by the way, if you press the up arrow, you recover previous commands. Similarly, you need to set your username using the same command: git config -- global user.name, and if you set it, the way to set it is giving a space, quotes, and saying something like your real name, Mauro Lepore, and then hit enter. If you have done that already, then when you query the value with this command, you would get as an output the value that you set, right? If it's wrong, you simply do it again with the correct name. So if I want to change my name to something else, this is how I would do it. It would overwrite the previous value set. Okay, so that's all you need to know to set your to introduce yourself to Git. There's more instructions here, other ways to do the same thing, but for now that's all you need. So if that works, maybe stop there. If you're curious and you want to read, then please go ahead. Finally, let's talk about the idea of installing a Git client. What is a client? Well, that's explained here. It's simply software that allows you to use Git in a friendly way. So Git itself is a tool that you use from the terminal, from something like this. You type in commands like what I have just shown, like git, and do something else. But there are other ways to interact with Git, including RStudio itself. Notice that there is a tab called Git, and it allows you to interact with Git. So you may use Git from the terminal if you are comfortable with it, or if you want to learn the terminal. I do it that way, but you don't have to. There is other software that you can use to interact with Git in a more friendly way. For example, RStudio from the Git pane, and a few other tools that are pointed here in the book by Jenny. So if you scroll down here, recommended Git clients, Git Kraken is one that I have tried. It's really nice. Source Tree is one that Jenny Bryan apparently uses a lot, and she recommends it strongly. GitHub Desktop is one by GitHub. It used to be really bad, and now apparently it's a little bit less bad. So the authors are now cautiously optimistic that the tool might work for you. And that's about it. If you want to keep things simple, start with RStudio and see if that does it for you. It also includes like a visual tool history. I think if you click history, now it's going to be boring because there is nothing in the history of this repository, but that tool is a visual way to see what is the history of this project, which is probably the one most useful feature, other than the ability to commit files from here. We're going to probably show you that in a moment when we talk about connecting to GitHub and making sure that you can pull and push from your environment to GitHub. Okay, that is all I wanted to cover in this video. In the next one, we're going to be using RStudio to set up keys to connect to GitHub using SSH. I'm going to explain that in a moment. All right, see you in the next video.